right, I am waiting on. All right, we should be live now. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Saturdays with Miss J. I am excited to be here. I'm just going to check a couple of things to make sure that everything is working how it should be. As you see, I have some new gadgets going on. And so actually I want to just come on through. I'm going to, move some things around really quickly. Hopefully that won't be too distracting. And we're going to go ahead and get started. I have some new tools, some new toys, and so I am checking through and seeing how this goes today. But I am watching, I am in the Facebook page, and so I will be able to reach out to you. And if you have any questions, feel free to come on through and put them in the chat box. As always, if you are coming with me or on this journey today with me for the first time, my name is Jay Snipes. I am a coach, consultant, a human resource professional. I like to talk about things that I think are very effective in the lives of women and men and everybody in some of these things. On Queening Effortlessly, another platform that I share, we specifically target our queens. But these topics that I do on Miss J is typically something that anyone can gain some pearls of wisdom for. But today I wanted to just come in and talk about healthy boundaries. And if you haven't had an opportunity to learn more about boundaries, especially in 2020, when we were in COVID isolation, a whole lot of things were happening and we just couldn't operate in the same manner that we had been operating previously. There is something that you need to learn so that when we start going back to normal, when life gets back, you've had your vaccine or your coworkers have had their vaccine, whatever the case may be, and they're going to ask you to come back to work. Your friends are going to want to socialize. You're going to want to go and do things that we haven't been able to do in such a long time. But our coming out process, or our going quote unquote back to normal process, will have to be a little different because we've changed over the course of these 18 months. Our ideas, concepts, way that we care for ourselves has also changed over the course of these 18, 24, however many months it's been. It's been a long time since we have been in a phase of normality. So anyway, let's jump right in. Come on in, like, share, comment, let me know if you're here, or if you're watching this on replay, leave me a thumbs up so that I can know that you're getting the content. I am also in preparation for a transfer to YouTube, so this is why I'm trying out some of these new things that you haven't seen. We're going to level up since our first videos that happened in April or May when COVID struck. I started going live talking about things that were COVID related, but didn't want to stay in that lane specifically because there's so much more that I do in the course of my businesses, my entrepreneurship, my coaching, my full-time job. So I didn't want to just stay COVID related topics because that is a trap, and we're going to just move forward. So today, healthy boundaries. I'm going to dive in right now. Share with someone if you think that they need to hear this as well. So healthy boundaries are those boundaries that you set to make sure that you are mentally and emotionally stable. And that means guarding your space, protecting your energy, making sure that you can conserve the things that are most beneficial for you and to you so that you can give your best in the areas that you want to give in. So it's about kind of separating things from you and including things that you want into your life so that you can have some stability in your mental, physical, and emotional space. While boundaries sometimes seem to be like psychological or emotional, they can also be physical boundaries, and how, like I said, you manage your personal space, your home, your workspace, all of those other different things. And we're going to talk about a little bit of all of this in today's episode. Healthy boundaries are a crucial component for self-care. And so I know a lot of us have been in this whole take care of yourself because the world just has so much going on. And if you are tuned into the news, if you're watching the trial videos, if you watch the news, every day we get bombarded with things that just show us that the world isn't necessarily going to take care of us. So we have to take care of ourselves. In that manner, taking it down from the world into a more smaller context, your particular world, the place in which you operate in, you have to also make sure that you are taking care of that so that you can maintain the peace and the prosperity that you deserve. So, some advantages of healthy boundaries, and I'm going to come back in a moment and talk about healthy and talk about other types of boundaries, because we might have quote unquote boundaries, but are they healthy boundaries? So we're going to talk about what that means. We're going to talk about what that looks like, and we're going to talk about how to do it. So stay tuned. But advantages of healthy boundaries include, of course, I've said it probably 3 times already, good mental health. And you want to make sure that you are in a good place mentally. Also, good emotional health. Not necessarily that the type of person who is riding an emotional roller coaster, because that affects other parts of your life. Your ability to develop some form of autonomy and not to be codependent or interdependent on other folks, whether that be in your personal relationships or in your professional relationships. It helps also to develop your identity, getting in touch with what you want, what you like, what you're not going to accept, and what you're not going to include. And so once you have some limits, some boundaries there about what's acceptable in your world and not, then that helps you to identify more of who you are, what type of person you're going to be, and how people are going to experience you. The other thing is avoidance of burnout. And there are some weeks, I'm sure, that we all feel that we have burned ourselves out, or that the calls on our life, our creativity, our energy, our attention has just put us to a place in which we feel like we are just finished, fizzed out, can't do anymore, probably don't want to do anymore. And so I want to make sure that you understand your ability to manage these things is all about boundaries. And then boundaries also give you the ability to influence others' behaviors, especially when it comes to you, and how people are going to interact with you. So those are the things that we're going to talk about today, and some advantages of why this information is important to you. But one of the things that I wanted to discuss really quickly are types of boundaries. And so if you think about healthy boundaries and what that means for you, we're also going to talk about rigid boundaries, porous boundaries, and how those compare to healthy boundaries. Okay, so rigid boundaries. If you think about rigid boundaries, you want to think about just the brick walls and the walls that you build around yourself. And if you have a lot of rigid boundaries, that basically is going to close off some relationships that you potentially could have. You are going to be very protective of yourself, have very few close relationships, and you may be the type of person that's unlikely to ask for help. And so we all need help. That's something that if you haven't learned that you need other people, then that's a topic for another Saturday. But rigid boundaries are those brick walls. It's set in stone, not going to change. And it may make you seem or appear detached in the settings in which you have put up those rigid boundaries. The second type of boundary is going to be the porous boundary. And the porous boundaries are the boundaries in which you allow someone to potentially, or allow some things to get too close to you, or you're too open. They really don't have any substance because they kind of wane and wax or ebb and flow with maybe the day, maybe the weather, maybe whatever emotional state. But those with porous boundaries also tend to have difficulty saying no to other people. They sometimes find themselves getting over involved in the problems that other people bring to them because they don't know how to have that separation. The type of person with plenty of porous boundaries may also have a dependence on other people's opinions and what they think about you, how they feel towards you, and how they interact. And it matters what people think and what people say. Come along with that is, of course, the fear of rejection if you don't go along to get along, so to say, and sometimes oversharing of the personal information because you let so many people pile onto you and give you all of their emotional baggage potentially. And sometimes you also feel like you need to outpour so that there is some quote unquote camaraderie there. And so there's pros and cons to having rigid boundaries, having porous boundaries, but the ideal is going to be having healthy boundaries. And healthy boundaries is when you are, of course, valuing your own opinion, not compromising your values for others, when you understand how to share personal information appropriately, understanding your wants, needs, desires, and being able to communicate them, and then of course accepting when others say no and when you have to say no or want to say no to other people. Now, most people have a mix of these boundary types, but for you to have a mix that, like I said, protects your mental and emotional space, you want to make sure that you understand where those are appropriate, and that may depend on the setting or the person that you are having an engagement with at that point in time. And it also could potentially have some cultural expectations mixed in there. But you want to make sure that first you kind of do an audit. Do I have boundaries, first of all? Hopefully you do. What type of boundaries do I have, and how can I change those into healthy boundaries? So let's talk real life, real world really quickly before I move on to how to create healthy boundaries or how to explore those boundaries. So if you are, it's really easy to change to accommodate other people. And if you are developing a new friendship or developing a new relationship, romantic relationship, sometimes you see that you kind of let your boundaries down, you let your guard down, you kind of walk into it open, and then after something happens, you realize, okay, that's a no-go. Or let's talk about a new job as well. Think about these, whatever you're experiencing right now at the moment. You have a new job, you have a new friend, you have a new romantic partner. So in this newness, we have an ability or a tendency, to have kind of very porous boundaries because we don't know what is expected of us and what we are expecting of this person at that particular beginning, but we should walk into those places with our healthy boundaries instead of the rigid or the porous, and that will allow us to integrate into those relationships and establish a foundation of how we're going to interact with those people in those places, etc., and those experiences from the outset, instead of trying to correct something on the end. So I want to give you an example of a work boundary, a personal boundary. A couple of years ago, I was working in an industry where we had a lot of, we would basically do group hiring, and I was a quote unquote pro veteran, whatever you want to call it, not in that new cohort of folks. And in comes about 4 or 5 new hires. And they're trying to, of course, establish themselves, make friends, make personal, alliances and relationships, and just expressing themselves in ways that they thought was appropriate. And so I had an encounter with someone, and they were talking to me across the room, but they were approaching me in their approach. And this is in their approach, they were also waving their finger, like talking to me like this. It wasn't in a reprimand kind of way, but the body language was not comfortable for me. And so I stopped immediately. Yeah, this might be your 4th day on the job. But I stopped them immediately and said, you know what? I don't appreciate you pointing at me, and you can back up a little bit. We can have a conversation without this. You can point at yourself. Probably not the most professional at that point in time, but I was slightly taken aback at the fact that you were comfortable enough to do that with someone that you didn't know. And because I needed him to understand that doesn't fly with me, I had to verbalize it. So this is the how. We're going to jump into the how. And FYI, I have on a shirt that says, I can't. It has something at the bottom as well. But we're going to talk about how to set the boundaries, how to communicate them, and what to do and what not to do. You need to make sure that you're having boundaries at work, in your professional relationships, in your personal relationships, and then physical boundaries as well as some emotional boundaries. So let's start with work. Healthy boundaries at work help you to find more fulfillment in your job because you are able to balance your professional relationships, as well as leave some time for your personal life. You want to make sure that you're not just so into work that everything else doesn't matter and then everything else is on the back burner. It's easy to do that when you are in a career growth mode. So if your goal is growth, sometimes you think you got to work your fingers to the bone, burn the midnight oil, work 60 hours a week to get it done. That is not a healthy boundary. That is a very unhealthy boundary that's going to lead you to burnout a lot more quicker and a lot less satisfaction in that phase. In your personal or your relationships, you want to make sure that you're setting healthy boundaries so that you can make sure that folks understand that they cannot have unreasonable demands on your time or your emotions. So we have friends, family, etc., that have habits or potentially have developed habits in which they are just think that you should always be available for them. And whenever something goes wrong, they are going to call you immediately, no matter what time that is. You have to have some self-care there and make sure that you understand that you have to regulate how folks have access to your time, have access to your energy, and have access to your emotions. Because sometimes folks will just be like, I need you right now. And I don't care if it's 10:55 p.m. or I don't care if it's 1 o'clock p.m. and I know you're working. I need to talk to you. And their needs become bigger than your needs. And then your availability has to acquiesce to their desires. And that's where we start having some issues with setting boundaries. We're going to talk about this a little more in detail. Something else that I wanted to talk to you about. So let's talk about the other one I talked about was emotional. You have to protect your emotion and set some emotional boundaries, because there are times when people are going to want to have hard, difficult, or highly emotional conversations with you. And you have to be able to say, now isn't the best time, or this is how I prefer to talk, so that you can engage in a manner that suits you and that is most conducive to a productive conversation. So let me give you a personal example about this. My husband is a numbers guy. Math, numbers, money, finances, anything having to do with that, like he's all in. And I have had in our relationship have had to communicate with him when it's okay to have conversations with me about those things, because that for me is a something that I need to be focused on. I have to be ready to talk about and be prepared for that conversation. He gets up frequently early in the morning. He'll get up, 5, 6 o'clock. He'll go down to the office, fiddle faddle, blue, blue, blue. And on those paydays, he's like paying bills before I'm even awake, right? So he's going through the budget, paying the bills, and then I'm up, moving around, getting dressed. My morning routine requires peace, calm, and some emotional and mindset work. And I can't have a conversation about the budget or the bills at that point in time. So let's not have the conversation there, because I'm not going to be engaged. I'm probably going to get a little flustered or frustrated. I might not be listening to you because my process has been interrupted to accommodate your process. We have two very different morning routines and processes, so therefore I can't necessarily say, okay, let's talk about it, knowing that it has the potential to tank my day. So we're going to talk about money things, finance, budget, etc. later on in the afternoon, after I've had an opportunity to have my come to Jesus moments, my meditation, my affirmations, and all of those things. That is a boundary that I had to establish early in our relationship because our routines were starting to gel. When we're going to have those deep conversations about things that really matter, like big, important life milestones or whatever the case may be. How I want to have those conversations, I've communicated. How he likes to have those conversations has been communicated. And we understand that this is the best time to or not to have the conversation. It's setting the boundary so that you can manage your emotional energy in a way that's going to be conducive for the outcome that you want. All right. I feel like I said a whole lot. And I'm going to recap momentarily. But boundaries also come in the form of physical boundaries. And that is the kind of like a barrier between you and something external. These types of boundaries include physical touch. Are you a hugger? And how do you interact with folks who just are going to hug and touch you because that's what they prefer? How do you guard your space, whether that be your workspace, your house? Who's welcome, who's not welcome? What are the things that are allowable in your space, in your personal space? How are people going to address you, and all of those different things? Those are physical boundaries. So for example, if you have someone who loves to get close to you and they don't have a personal space boundary, they don't respect the bubble, so to say, because they like to be close to people. Touch might be their love language, and it might not be for you. So you have to establish that boundary and separate yourself, step back, slide over, whatever the case may be, so that you can reestablish the physical boundary that's most comfortable for you at that point in time. We want to make sure that you have some of those in your professional friendships and also in your intimate relationships. Where are your sexual boundaries? What is permissible? What is not? How do you communicate those things? Because if you're in a long-term relationship, marriage, etc., you want to make sure that people understand that part of your life also has some boundaries as well. So the reason why we don't set boundaries is because we have a fear of rejection, a fear of confrontation, or sometimes there is guilt around the fact that you are going to put your desires, needs, etc. above or in front of someone else's. We are not necessarily taught how to have healthy boundaries, because in our early childhood, of course, they teach you don't talk to strangers, all of those things. Don't let people bully you. Don't let people put their hands on you. But you have a parental figure that is frequently breaking all of those boundaries, right? Potentially. And then we don't really talk about that when they're going through the developmental phases, through middle school, through high school, into college, where they're going to have relationships outside of the house, people that you don't know. How do you manage that, and how do you help your kids manage their healthy boundaries? So because it's not something that we've consistently discussed, we haven't necessarily built our boundary setting muscles, or we haven't necessarily understood how to do that in the right way. But we're going to talk right now about how to do that, how to set healthy boundaries. And there is basically going to be a 4-step process. Get your pencil, get your notebook, your notepad, whatever you got. So let's talk about how to set healthy boundaries. All right. So step number 1 is going to, first of all, kind of define what those boundaries are. And if you don't know what boundaries you need to set, then there is basically an exploration process that you need to go through. And think about where do you have issues with boundaries, and are there particular relationships? So I don't have good boundaries with my husband. I don't have good boundaries with my coworkers. I don't have good boundaries with my kids. And I am in kid boundary setting process right now, basically reinforcing. If you are a parent, and I'm going to take a tangent really quickly, but I'm going to come back. If you're a parent, especially a parent of younger kids, you know that boundaries just kind of went out of the door. Personal space, personal time, all of that kind of went out the door for kids. They walk into your room, they demand what they want whenever they want it. If you breastfed, you probably lost all sense of couth and culpability when it comes to showing or where you're going to be breastfeeding. Your kids are just like, give it to me now. They're pulling down your shirt, they're doing all this craziness, and you are in mommy mode. And so you are just like, okay, this is what the baby needs. I'm going to put myself on the back burner, and we lose ourselves in motherhood so quickly, so fast, and repeatedly. So at some point in time, you have to come back to self and set some boundaries. My current boundary setting is this whole knocking on the door and respecting the closed door. It's a physical barrier, but it's also a mental barrier. So that when I need personal time, private time, downtime, mommy time, if the door is closed, don't come in. Don't just open it. You have to knock, and you have to respect the answer on the backside. And so there are still times where, my kids walk in the bathroom and I'm like, did you knock? Or I'm changing clothes and the door opens and I'm like, did you knock? I don't want to lock the door, even though I could, but I need them to understand that there are boundaries, and they're going to want those same boundaries and level of respect when they get a little older, hit puberty, all of those things. So we're in boundary setting mode there, because there are times where it's just a no. I can't do it, I don't want to, etc. So that door represents the physical barrier, but there's also a physical boundary, but there's also other things that are intangible that I'm trying to get my children to understand. All right, so where do you struggle to set healthy boundaries is your first step. And think about, are those physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, material boundaries? Like, what are you willing to share and what are you not willing to share? Time boundaries. If you're having an intimate relationship, where are your sexual boundaries? And then where are your intellectual boundaries? All of these things, you kind of say, this is where my boundaries. Number one, they may not exist at all. Number two, they may be porous or weak, so to say. Number three, they may be rigid. Or number four, they are healthy. And I don't know if I said that, but they may not even exist. So if they don't exist, we want to make sure that we're taking some time to figure out where those things are draining of our emotional, mental, or physical capacities and identify where the boundaries should be. So first up, define it and make sure that you have clearly identified your needs regarding that boundary. The second thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure that you are communicating the boundary in a manner that can be accepted, but also respected by whoever you're going to be engaging with. Now, again, at this point in time, you're probably going to feel a little selfish, guilty, or embarrassed when you're setting these boundaries, but you have to do it anyway. And remind yourself, you have a right to protect your space. You have a right to self-care. And once you start setting boundaries, you will lose some of that anxiety, fear, or guilt, whatever you're experiencing. If the person you are communicating with show signs of anger or resentment, then you need to reevaluate their actual level of care for you. Because what you're doing isn't about the other person. It is about you being able to keep yourself balanced mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, etc. So someone who actually cares for you respects those boundaries. And when those boundaries are consistently disrespected, ignored, etc., there might be something in that relationship or in that scenario that you want to reevaluate. But number two, communicate. When you're communicating your boundaries, make sure that you're keeping the focus on you, because this is about you. It is not about saying, well, you need to give me more time. You need to give me my space. How about you saying, I need some time to myself when I come home from work. I need some time for myself, XYZ, whatever the case may be. That way, it doesn't feel like an attack to the person who you're communicating to, but it is more about, this is what I need, and if you can respect my needs, then everything's going to be fantastic. All right? The other thing that I wanted to touch on really quickly, saying no, or in this case, I can't. When you say no, simply say no. There is no need for a justification on why the answer is no. You have a right to just be like no, because it doesn't necessarily fit for you. Instead of providing an excuse or over-explaining the crucial aspects of your reasoning. So, I can't do this because blah, blah, blah. I don't want to. It makes me feel uncomfortable. Anytime you give an excuse, a person who's adamant about what they're trying to get you to do is also going to have a counter offer, counteract, whatever you're saying. But why? Well, this is a solution, but why? And now you're in a debate about something that you really don't want to do because you didn't say no firmly, flat out, and close the door on that situation. Saying no is, again, about you, your needs, desires, and wants, and not about the other person. Now, if there's something very important for you to do for that relationship, if showing up is important for you to be a good friend, then show up. But does that mean you have to show up every single time? Maybe not. Maybe I only go to 8 of 10 of your events instead of 10 out of 10, especially when your mama, your husband, your sister, your brother, etc. aren't always at 10 out of 10. Maybe I need a break as well. And this time it's just no. All right. Everybody has the opportunity, the right, and the responsibility to determine what they do and what they don't want to do. And being able to communicate that is just step number one. All right. So, that is kind of also leads into the next one. Besides communicating, also keep it simple. You don't owe everyone an explanation when it comes to taking care of yourself. You can just say, no, not now, maybe on next Saturday, whatever the case may be. But you want to make sure when you're setting those boundaries, you're doing it clearly, calmly, firmly, respectfully, and again, in just as few words as possible. Don't justify, don't get angry, and don't apologize for the boundary you are setting. Don't apologize for saying, listen, don't call me after 8 o'clock. You don't need to tell them what you're doing after 8 o'clock p.m. If my phone rings after 8 o'clock p.m., I'm not answering, FYI. My phone because the people that are in my life, they understand where that boundary lies. My phone rarely rings after 8. And so in that boundary setting process, though, let's talk about this 8 o'clock phone call. In this boundary setting process, especially when you're transitioning, I was transitioning from single life to married life and then to motherhood. And of course, with that comes some additional boundaries. Things that I could do as a single person, I'm not going to do as a married person, or things that I wanted to do as a single person, I may not want to do as a married person. And things that I want to, or can do as a parent, I'm probably not going to do as well. So don't call me at 8 o'clock means don't call me after 8 o'clock. And the folks who quote unquote tried it will find themselves on a voicemail. It's just that I'm not answering the phone. The phone is turned off or the ringer is turned off. And that way my boundary can be reinforced. And then I'll check the voicemail or the text message tomorrow, and I'll get back to you in a time that makes sense for me. Because at 8 o'clock, I'm winding down. I'm spending family time. I'm spending one-on-one time with my husband, etc. So, no, we just can't have a random conversation after 8. I'm not going to do that because that is how I maintain my balance. And so if 8 o'clock is your prime work time, your kids are in bed, and now you want to talk, that's good, but maybe we need to talk on Saturday. I can't just be available to you when you need it. I need to also take care of myself. So, again, don't over-explain. I would just tell folks, listen, don't call me after 8. And if they called after 8, the consequence that they got was a voicemail. And so, in those other examples of things is number 2, the last step in your how to set boundaries process, which I'll recap, is set consequences. This is my boundary. If you cross my boundary, this is what's going to happen. This is my boundary. If you cross the boundary, this is what's going to happen. It doesn't necessarily have to be communicated. It just has to be reinforced. So I'm not going to pick up my phone after 8 and go, hey, I told you not to call me at 8 o'clock. What's up? Or I can't talk right now. No, you're just going to go to voicemail. If I don't want you to call me before 7 o'clock a.m., you're going to get the same thing. You're going straight to voicemail. If I don't want you to show up at my house unexpected, and I'm trying to stop that behavior, then when you show up without calling before you come, you ring the doorbell and you don't cross the threshold. Now, this may seem so rude to so many people, but not to me. I don't want you to just show up, pop up, swing by, right? If that's your boundary. So if you ring my doorbell, I will step onto the porch, tell you that I'm not available, ask you if you have an emergency, and then you go your way and I go mine. You have to protect your space and you have to set the consequence. If you tell me not to show up to your house unannounced and I come by on Sunday, you let me in, we sit down and we have a 3-hour conversation, and then on Tuesday I swing by after work and then you let me in and we're going to have some drinks and girl talk, and then on Friday night, 10 o'clock, I decide that I want to come and share a bottle of wine with you. I show up, ring the doorbell, you let me in. You aren't reinforcing the boundaries, and so therefore I think that it doesn't apply to me. Oh, that's for your other friends. That doesn't apply to me. And so, therefore, because they are an exception to that one boundary, they may also decide to overstep other boundaries. And so, you have to make sure that you communicate it, that you stay firm, and that you set the consequences. So I'm going to recap those 4 steps. How to set boundaries, healthy boundaries, once you've identified where the porous things are or where you're being too rigid. Number 1, define what it is. Number 2, communicate it. Number 3, keep it simple, no justification or over explaining. And number 4, set the consequences and hold yourself accountable for executing those consequences in whatever form. Now, if you can take that and extrapolate it to your work, your relationships, your friendships, etc., then you'll start to see that you have time, effort, and energy in the areas that you want more control over, and you want to set those boundaries in, because something to remember is that when you have done that and you develop a support network of people who respect your boundaries, then you have an opportunity to nurture that community in the same way. You kind of build a tribe of folks that respect you in several different ways, and they aren't trying to manipulate, abuse, or control you by their actions and always asking you to basically lay down, roll over, etc., for the actions that they are putting on you, so to say. All right. One of the last things I want to just talk to you in closing is just to let you know that the consequences of not setting healthy boundaries include stress, sometimes financial burdens. And I talk to so many clients who are trying to find new jobs, different jobs, extra jobs, whatever the case may be, because they have a hard time setting boundaries around finances for their children, for the other folks in their family who they depend on, the people they're always bailing out, sometimes for themselves. My friend wants me to go on this trip with her, and I really don't have the spare funds to do that. So I need another job because my credit cards are out of control, and I really want to, or I need to, or whatever the case may be, whatever those potential guilts are. They find themselves spending more out of pocket because they can't say no, or they can't say, I can't afford it, let's do something different. So financial burdens is a potential other effect of not setting healthy boundaries. Wasting time, because people can be a time suck when they call you and just start talking and haven't asked you if you're available or free to talk. They just start talking. You can't get a word in edgewise. And then an hour and a half later, they finally take a breath and say, so how you doing, sis? What's going on? That's not acceptable. Another effect of not setting healthy boundaries is potentially relationship issues, because if your boundaries haven't been communicated or set appropriately, and you have those that continue to operate however they choose to operate, and you're always at other people's will, there's a level of dissatisfaction and unhappiness that's going to set in. It might be resentment. It might show up in so many different ways that your relationship is going to suffer for it. So you have to set the boundaries and communicate. And then, of course, all of this wraps up into mental distress, right? There is the worry, anxiety, fear, frustration that you carry consistently because you aren't being cared for, interacted with, respected in a manner that makes you healthy and whole. So we want to make sure that we take the time to protect ourselves, protect our energy, protect our just take care of ourselves so that we can have equal partnerships with those that we are interacting with, co-workers, relationships, all of the people that we give our time, effort, energy to. the people that we choose to engage with. We have to make sure that our boundaries are healthy and that they are communicated and that we are operating in a manner that makes our lives easier so that we can keep and take care of the mental and emotional parts of our lives. So that is the talk for the day. I hope that out of all of that, sometimes I feel like I'm rambling on, but I hope out of all of that you got something that will help you to move in a direction in which you are, which you feel more balanced and you feel like you are doing the things that are keeping you at peace in all of the aspects of your life. So I wanted to just say thank you for joining me. Again, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram at IamMsJ. I will let you know when the YouTube channel pops off, and hopefully you can get the content there as well. But I appreciate you for joining or for rewatching. Again, leave a heart, like, thumbs up. Let me know that you were here. I do see a comment, and I wanted you to, yes, communicating and setting those healthy boundaries, absolutely, in your business life is especially important, especially if you're an entrepreneur or you're starting a new venture with someone, right? Their work ethic and what they want might not always line up to the same things that you, so you have to communicate and set those boundaries as well. So one of my favorite sayings, you have to teach people how to treat you. And if you can do that through communication and identifying and setting healthy boundaries, communicating them as well, and reinforcing the boundaries, then I think you're well on your way to a fantastically balanced split space and place. Feel free to reach out to me, connect with me on my coaching business, the Illumine Group LLC. There's, I'm sure, an email address up in these comments. So I just greatly appreciate you taking the time. Have a fantastic day, and I look forward to seeing you again next Saturday. Have a good day.